Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. Today we're actually going to be talking about car spaces. Now, what exactly is a car space and how is that important in the commercial property space? Now, a lot of people think about today's video is going to be about should you invest in a car space? Well, that's not technically commercial. It is sometimes you can buy commercial car spaces in big car, Wilson's car parks and own them. A lot of that people do use to rent them out, but the thing is you can't finance that. It has to be drawn down usually using a line of credit, or most people will probably invest that if they had extra money sitting in the bank. The whole thing is you're going to get a return from it, but it won't be as great as your normal standard commercial property returns. And also, there is also management fees to be paid on that to the people who manage it. There is rates notices on it, as well as sometimes body corporate fees or maintenance fees on it. And sometimes the government also charges you a levy. So you got to think about it. And often, most of the time, you don't get the same returns as actually, your sub 3 or 4% if you're doing it in metro area. So I'm not talking about car spaces in that sense. I'm actually talking about car spaces in the sense of whether it's important for you having a commercial property on. In metro areas, most people are used to having less car spaces. So they can either travel to work by bus, using Uber, by train, public transport. They don't really need a car space. So it's always a bonus to have a car space. So you could have 100, 150 square meters and only be given 1 or 2 car spaces. So that can seem like a bit of a rort, but that's how it works when you're in metro. So car spaces actually becomes of value. Now, when you are in regional and you're looking at land, it's interesting to talk about a car space and how that affects you as a property owner. So it's important that you have the open space allowable for car spaces, because in regional people have the association for space, so they expect that you would, for a small office space of 200 or 300 square meters, you'll have somewhere around 4 to 6 car spaces, because everyone drives to work. It's relatively cheap. Public transport isn't that great, so that's why most people prefer you to have a car space, and it's quite normal. So you might see that in a 2-story building that it has 30, 40 car spaces, and you're thinking, wow, would we need that many car spaces? Most of the time the answer is yes. So don't underestimate it, and sometimes you can't take that away. Whereas in metro areas, you can quite often, if you have additional car spaces, rent it out to someone else, and that's perfectly acceptable. And you might want to do that over a period of time. Say you give your tenant 4 car spaces, you might end up giving them 2 in the future and renting out the other 2, but that'd be gradually happening every time you change the lease. So the thing to remember is the ratio of car spaces to how many employees your tenant have. In a regional area, most people expect there's a car space for almost every one of their employees, unless you're next to a council car park or a really cheap parking lot where you can park for a few dollars a day. So I remember I was in regional Queensland, and next to a car space, people used to grumble to me about, oh, I don't have anywhere to park to work. And I used to say, well, how much is parking? And I worked out it was like $3 a day. And I was like, well, why are people whinging about that? Because in Sydney, you pay like $70 for a day, and that's if you're lucky to park all day as, an employee. But anyway, people have different perceptions. In Sydney and in any metro areas, people aren't expecting car spaces. The other thing is with regional, a lot of people actually find it a premium, or they will pay a premium for a property where they can just pull up and park right out the front. And if you had some car space out the front or at the side of the building, that's where people are going to be more likely to attract to that space, and your tenant actually wants to rent that space because it's just convenience for them as well. And it's just the way they expect in terms of their rentals and in terms of access to their property as well. So it's just a matter of perception. So when you're looking at it, we're looking at car spaces in a lot of regional, thinking, oh, well, there's land I can build on. Well, not really. So you've got to really look at that and say, look, how much car space does my tenant need? Can I take away 1 or 2 and maybe put some storage or maybe those shipping containers on there and utilize that without really taking away too much from my tenant as well? So that's what you got to be careful of. Whereas in metro areas, you might build a storage cage down there in your car space or your exclusive use area and actually find that more useful for your tenant than having an extra car space. So it's all very relative, and that's what it's about. So when you're looking at additional land, the other thing is when you're about to change of use for the property, the car space really comes in. So whereas you can get away in commercial where you don't need a car space for your tenants. So you might have one car space or no car spaces if you're in the high streets. But whereas if you're going to convert that now from resi to commercial, from commercial to resi or resi to commercial, you might find the ratio of car parking then changes, especially when you have a residential space. People are expecting there is going to be some kind of car space. Whereas when you go from resi to commercial, you could quite easily look at maybe not giving your tenant as much or doing an extension on the back end of the property where you have less car space but more space in general. So that is where the difference is. So you've got to be mindful of that when you do a change of use as well. So I've dealt with clients who are dentists. So for example, for dentists or medical, it's 1:5 ratio. So dentists a little bit less than that, but they typically like to have their main dentist like to have, one car space for each of them, and they like to have 3 or 4 visitor car spaces for their clients coming in and out. I've dealt with psychologists who are looking at one space for pretty much every one of their therapists, plus the fact that they also want another 3 to 4 up to 6 if they say, for example, one for each of their therapists as a visitor car space for their tenants as well. So when they're looking for space to rent or space to buy, what they're typically looking for is a space where they have a lot of parking. So they'll have a lot of visitors parking in the strata complex, and they themselves may have designated 4 parking spaces, and they may rent out another 2 inside the building. Purely if they have, for example, 4 or 6 therapists, they'll want one for each client as well. For dentists we spoke about, but also for when we're talking about medical. So when you have a GP, it's 1:5 ratio. So for every GP, they want actually 5 parking spaces. So this is where parking spaces become relative. And the value of the car space and vacant land you think, oh, I can build on. Well, depending on the type of tenant and the type of a car space available, then that becomes all of a sudden really, really important. And this is evident in one of the deals we're recently doing. We're doing a medical build down in Albury where we actually have 52 car spaces. In order for us to be able to convert that place into a medical center and a medical build, the car spaces actually became essential as part of it, because our doctors were expecting to park, they were expecting visitor car parking, and also because we're also next to a council car park, that's also an additional benefit as well. So when you're looking at these uplifts and you want to convert them from one use to another, think about car spaces and what kind of tenant you're going to attract, especially when you want the allied health or the medical type tenant. Trade tenant is another one where accessway and turning bays are really important. So sometimes you have to remove parking spaces so that they can have a good turning bay and that access. We're in the self-storage business as well in one of our deals, and we can see that having car spaces and larger car spaces, people can back in their trailers and everything, becomes really important. So while you may not think that car spaces are important, you think I can just rent them out, it depends on whether in metro or in regional, and that changes. And also the type of tenant you want to attract, then the car spaces becomes important. I've known people who have government tenants and they want a particular lot of car spaces, and they're actually renting for their tenants, other additional parking spaces at adjacent lots to be able to satisfy the need of that tenant as well. So especially important, the value of car spaces is not to be undermined. And when you're looking at expanding and changing the use on your property, do consider that and actually get that ratio right so that you can attract the right tenants. So hopefully that's been helpful. And of course, definitely our due diligence team and our construction side of the business can help you with looking and checking to see if you've got the right car space and the right ratio for when you do your commercial property deal. Again, we're here to build out a portfolio and a journey with you. So if you're looking for someone to help you and guide you and have all the expertise so that you have one-stop shop for commercial, reach out to me, helentarrant.com, or simply email me at helen@commercialpropertycashflow.com.au. Until next video, I'm going to keep hunting for properties. I'll see you soon. Bye.